objectives and research questions. So I'm going to take you through that. Also, as you can see, my name is Public Mentor. I'm from the marketing department, the business. I'm sure you all know how difficult it is to create your research objectives, how to come up with, so to speak, a researchable objective, a researchable topic. How do you define the research area actually, and from which you derive your research problems? These are crucial, and if you're not able to get it right, it makes it difficult for you to start your research. And I'm sure in one way or the other, we have come to the realization that, the research questions are very difficult to create. Most of the time, you send your work to your supervisor and says that, well, this can't be a research question, or research problem is not clear enough, or this is too broad, or this is too narrow. We're all too familiar with these issues. So today my duty is to let you have clarity on how to develop the research objectives, create questions out of that, and have a successful thesis. Thank you. We'll be doing some exercises along the line. I'll follow you to do some exercise with you. Alright? If the clarity is not there, let me know, and I'll clarify. Okay, so by the end of the session, you should be able to understand the importance of determining a research area. And from that, you should be able to what? Define and identify research objectives and research questions. All too often, like we said, we confuse topics with research areas. Is that okay to you? What is a research and what is a research area? Well, we're saying that the topic has to be very narrow. The research problem that you want to, or you're seeking to look into has to be narrow. Because if it's too broad, chances are that you can't even finish it before your time is over. And we always say that if you have interest in a very broader topic, leave it to the PhD, or after the PhD if you're a PhD student, so that you can actually look into it in the future. You can even divide them into chunks, so that your MPhil takes one of them. In future, when you're doing a PhD, you do the other. Don't try to accumulate so much, because time will not permit you to do that. So we're saying that the topic of research area refers to a general area of idea, of interest. For example, we may be interested in the issue of change. Ghana has gone through democratic changes. Most of our institutions are changing. So perhaps you're interested in change. That has to be narrowed. How do people adapt to changes? How do people, cope with changes? Could be an area. And even then, what is change itself? If you see change, how do you recognize it? How do you identify that this is a change? So these are some of the specifics that you can go into researching. But the area itself is about change management, for example. Alright? So you've got to find the research area. And the importance of identifying a research area is also to help you know what literature you have to consult. It is key that if you're not able to define or identify the particular research area, you're not likely to have literature. Does it occur to you people say, oh, there are no literature in that field? Why? Because you haven't been able to zone in on what you want to do. If you're able to zone in on what you want to do, maybe the literature may not be in that particular field, but there could be related fields that you can borrow. Are you with me? So it is crucial that you identify the research area that you want to investigate, and then you create the topic. That is different from the research problem. But the problem is narrow. I said earlier. We'll do some examples, and then you will see. So where do research areas come from? Determining the research area. Where do they come from? Thin air? No? The research area comes from your own observations. You have observed, or you actually, you're in a society, you're in a community, you've observed a lot of things. Some of them, they puzzle you, or maybe you work. Some of the things are not making meaning to you, you could actually use it. All right, you can actually look at a particular field and say, how do you get a particular research topic out of it? If there's a problem that is bothering you, why don't you pick it up as a research? Have you been to a shop and then the behavior is actually strange, or you haven't been able to get what you want? Is there a question that you can actually tease out of that experience? Or it could be a research that you've done early, like I said. If you have done a research and it's too broad, you leave some, you do it later times. All right? Or it can come from out of field. Have you heard the early bird catches the worm? Yeah. Do you agree with that? What about if the worm doesn't come out early? The early bird catches the worm. It's a theory. Yeah. All right? What if the bird doesn't get up early? Picture paint 1,000 words. Have you heard it? But it's all pictures painted 1,000 words. What if the picture is an abstract? You can't get the detail of it. Does that paint 1,000 words? So there are theories that you can actually tease out a research from. What is a theory? Theory is just a notion. I mean, something that we sort of think that they exist. All right? Something that you sort of think they exist, and it's become a common knowledge over time. You can tease out a research out of it. Are all Africans black, for example? All right? So, research area just don't come anywhere. They're all around us. That you can actually tease out and tease a problem out of it, and then prepare your thesis on that. Again, literature review, we're all familiar with it. When you're reading literature, look out for the signs. All right? Maybe the person will make an assertion and say, well, maybe this is a finding. But then some of the statement will be like hunch. All right? Like his own gut feelings. Now, once the person expresses that this is a particular gut feeling, it's a researchable area. Pick it up. So maybe I have actually found that all cars, all right, all cars actually go forward. And that's the research findings that I've got. But then I have a hunch that if these cars are going forward, there's possibility that the car can go back. When I say that, pick it up as a research area. So once you're actually reading the literature, look out for the signposts. Some of them will be clear. The author or the writer would say that this is an interesting area going forward, somebody can look at it. Some of them will not be clear, will be implicit. So look out for the signposting, and then underline some of them that you can actually look at. All right, so again, the literature review gives you an idea that you can actually research. Not only literature as an academic literature, sometimes newspapers can actually give you some idea. Online blogs can actually give you some idea. The only difference is that once you actually find out from the online blog or from the newspaper, has that been researched before? Should be the next question, because newspapers are newspapers. So you then have to find out whether that has been researched. If it's researched, then of course you've got to change it. It doesn't mean that throw it away, but you can actually look at a component aspect that hasn't been researched. All right. So, what is research area again? It is the field within which your work is situated. So research areas could be described with the pyramid framework. As I said, for example, a research in consumer behavior is situated in what? Look at that. Consumer behavior, consumer buying behavior, situated in what? Marketing. And from marketing, what? Segmentation, decision making, process, attitudinal and behavior theories. Do you agree? So whenever you find the area, look at the coordinates. From where or within which areas does that research area or the topic that you're looking at situate? Once you're able to build that structure, you will equally be able to trace the literature. So you won't be scattered. All right? So what is the big picture? So that's the pyramid. Marketing is the parent discipline. And the marketing, you know that when it comes to consumer behavior, you're likely to see segments. How do different segments behave? So segmentation. All right. The next is decision making. Consumer buying behavior, what does it do? It deals with decision making. When somebody wants to buy something, it goes through some processes, some stages. Okay, you put it in decision making. The next is what? Attitudinal and behavior theories. So once you're able to build that line or that structure, it makes it easy to do your literature review. So you know that the first point of call is marketing. What is the marketing literature? Go under segmentation. So you go to the database, the online database, you type in marketing and consumer behavior, you get something. You type in segmentation and consumer behavior, you get something. You type in decision-making process and consumer behavior, up until the point that you've built enough literature. Does that make sense? But if you're not able to situate, or if you're not able to identify the areas and the sub-areas that are related to the work, you're going to have a difficulty. I'll give you a practical example. One of my students is actually writing on engineering marketing. Is that strange? How do you market engineering product? It's a mundane area. Difficult. Because we're not used to engineering marketing. Engineers don't market. To the extent that the principle that you have to even advertise is forbidden in engineering. Alright? So how do you research that area? No literature. It's fancy. But what is engineering services consumption? Or engineering consumption? The product itself, engineering, what is it? It's a service. So clearly you have to go into the service marketing literature. Once you go to the service marketing literature, ask yourself, what is the consumer behavior towards engineering services? It's a complex engineering service, it's a complex product. For example, when you're building a house, it's as complex as financial services. Alright? So you can look at consumer behavior regarding financial services because of the complexity, because we have highly involved, kind of attitude in that. So you look at related areas of complexity and look at how the literature has used it to iron out consumer behavior, perhaps in finance or in banking, and then use that as a related area in your research for marketing engineering services. Are you with me? So there isn't a case that there is no literature, but there is a case that you haven't been able to identify or tease out related areas that can support your work. There's nothing wrong with borrowing from others. My research area typically was almost about 4 or 5 disciplines. I had journalism in it, so I had to go to journalism classes for journalism theories. I had political science in it. I had new media in it. I had marketing, which is the central focus. We have so many cross-disciplinary issues or theses out there. So you always have to build that thing. Where is the work situation? Build that. And once you build it, you'll be able to locate the literature. Are you with me? And you'll be able to locate which theories support a particular step. Alright, so why identify different research areas? Like I said, is to guide you on your literature review, theory identification and application, gap identification, conceptual development, and framing of your hypothesis. Because clearly, if that guides you for your literature review, reading the literature will help you to identify certain theories. Alright? And the consumer behavior that we're talking about. If you read a segmentation will tell you that there are different segments of customers or consumers. Those who are rational and those who are irrational or postmodern. What are the characteristics of them? Maybe people who are of a certain, what we call the millennials, are likely to behave postmodern because they don't commit to a particular company. And those elderly people who regard structures, they regard bureaucracies, are likely to what? Rational. It's giving you what? Theories. Are you with me? It's helping you to identify theories that you can use for your work. So if millennials, one theory, are postmodern, then of course you'll be able to do what? Honing on them and examine how they're going to behave in terms of buying products, or how they're going to behave in terms of relationship. And then you can critique that. Again, it helps you to identify gaps. Alright. If you identify that the millennials are actually what? Postmodern in their behavior, then what has the literature done about millennials and their buying behavior? After looking at that, you'll be able to tease out some gaps. Do we have different types of millennials? Yes. Obviously, you have male and females. All right. Do females behave differently from males? Yes. So if the literature has lumped them together as millennials, you can say that, well, you're looking at only the female millennials because they have different tendencies and different characteristics from the male millennial. It's a gap. Are you with me? So we need to clearly define the research areas to help us do this. Again, conceptual development. You know. So, what are some of the things that should guide your asking questions and developing your ideas going forward? Again, this will help you to do that. And then framing your hypothesis and your research questions, which will come to that. Your research must be interesting. It must be interesting. It shouldn't be boring. But it must be of interest to many people. But you see, the point is, usually when I read literature and somebody says, they talk about whether the research is important, and you know, they go and this research could be used by, they start writing. The government, they write all the stakeholders. Do you have to write that? No. I mean, from where you sit, where is the government going to get your literature to guide its work? Practically ask yourself. All right. So you've got to look at the immediate beneficiaries of your work. Don't mention all of them. Think you have some like this. You know? It must be interesting to these people, but you have to mention all of them. I mean, consumers, educators, or we help the universities to streamline the administration processes, and it helps the students to register. You don't have to mention all of them. Just look at the primary beneficiaries of your work. One that is, I mean, that is practically closer to using your work, or to using your findings. Alright? Don't just mention all these people, oh, you will help the police to do this. You know, will the police really get access to your work? That's the question. But perhaps they would, because maybe online, internet and things. But is that important? No. And you see, usually we always think, we say that, yeah, the work contributes to knowledge as the rationale behind it. Really? That's not the reason why you're doing the work. Alright? The core purpose of doing the work is to solve a particular social issue or an issue at stake. Contributing to knowledge is secondary. Don't bother yourself saying that it must, everybody knows that research contributes to knowledge. So it's almost like needless to say. You understand? It is needless to say because we know that academic research contributes to knowledge in a way. That should not be your finding. So when you're stating the rationale behind the work and things, just don't say contribute to knowledge. Please, say something else. It makes sense to say something else. Alright. So yeah, we're saying that it must actually be what? It must be interesting to these people. The examiner, the publisher, the student, everything else. But look for the primary type. Research area must be interesting. In what way? In what sense? Again, in what sense should it be interesting? And we're saying that, in this sense, it appeals to audiences such as practitioners and academics who must be able to make better decisions with enhanced understanding. Alright, the practitioners should be able to use your work to enhance their understanding of doing things. So like the consumer behavior we were talking about. And I'll come to an example. Say that you're actually selling for a group of people. Key of them is the pregnant woman. Alright? Now, how do the period of pregnancy impact on sales? It's a consumer behavior issue. But you are specifically looking at how do pregnancy, the duration of a pregnancy impact on sales. Which means if there's a particular amount that people get pregnant, you know that what your sales are going to dip. Alright? Which means that the decision to buy a particular product, which is oriented to a pregnancy woman, between those periods, you're not going to get inventory of that particular product. You've got to go for other inventory that can sell. So it has to be able to enhance decision making. If it's a corporate related research or any other organization research, it has to be able to inform decision making. for academics, of course, find that research contribution enhances knowledge in a particular field. So, can your research be used as an example to articulate an area? That's what we do. So, if I'm describing the way university works, and you've been able to do a research on university setup or environment, can I use your model or your framework as an example for people to clearly see what I mean when I'm describing how university works? These are some of the things that we're talking about. So this is one of the ways that your research can be interesting. All right. Make sure that you articulate exactly what it needs to achieve in terms of the audiences that the research is meant for. Your findings significantly impact on the target audience, like we said. You have to have an impact. Get them understand the area much clearer, or get them change certain decisions, or get them enhance on what they do to better do it, or get them stop what they do, because your research had actually come out with some findings. Again, the research potentially causes someone other than yourself to do something very different. You don't do the research for you, you do it for society. The research might cause them to make different decisions, such as change the objectives or adapt new ways of doing things, like we have said earlier. How do you achieve interest? So yeah, we said that it has to be interesting. How are you going to achieve that? We said some of them. But then again, let's see. With your research objectives and your research questions, key. If you can achieve those things, get people do things differently, get people change course, get people enhance their understanding, all goes on this. If you have the wrong questions and you have wrong objectives, you won't get that. And what I find is the coordination. People set objectives, and objective 1 is entirely different from objective 2. Objective 2 is entirely different from objective 3. Then it means your work is started. There has to be alignment. The first objective, the second objective has to have something to do with what? The first. The third has to have something to do with the first and the second. Alright? If you're not having that consistency is not there, and you think because you want to achieve that, you have 2, 3 different sets of objectives, the work is null and void. They have to align. Alright? The same way, you see somebody putting out a particular objective, and then the research question with which to achieve the objective is entirely somewhere. Because you see, and it's not your fault. There's a tendency that when you write it, and you're not paying attention to a particular thing, you will think that you have asked the question, but it's wrong. So, set the question as a draft, brood over it about a day or 2, come back to it and see whether it makes sense. Does this question answer this objective? You can even give it to colleagues to check whether, if you answer this question, does it achieve this particular objective? Sometimes you have to manually spread them on a table, and then use your eye to scan through. Look, the research is not a joke. And I'm sure you by now know that. It's not a joke. We've slept in offices countless. I remember my professor used to say, he had gone out with his wife and he was coming at 2 a.m. And they saw my light up. In the other place we used to have offices. And she says, I am sure copies out there. Sometimes you have to have sleepless nights, countless, just to get 1 or half page, or just to get the understanding that this particular question you pose makes sense. You've got to brood over. So they just don't, that's what Professor said, that because of time, people just rush it. If you do that, you're going to have a disjointed questions and research objectives. Write them down and brood over them. Sometimes one question can achieve 2 of your objectives. Alright? But make sure that you don't set a question that requires multiple answers, because then the consumer or the respondent could be confused, and then maybe give you only one and the other. So sometimes it's good, in most cases, it's good to make sure that each of your questions or each of your objectives actually carry one question that fulfills it. That way you know that people are going to adequately answer them. Alright? So how do we achieve interest with our research objectives and research aspects? In qualitative research, let me say this is a qualitative research. Most of you who do quantitative, you may have different presentations. I was asked to do qualitative, so that's what I prepared for. The problem also known as the overarching research question in qualitative. The research problem is the overarching research question. So you would have one broad research question. How do, again going back to pregnancy, how do pregnant women behave towards a particular product, let's say snails? Alright? That is your overarching research question, or the broad research question, and the problem, perhaps. Alright? Underneath that, then you can have your sub-questions teasing out. You can tease out the sub-question from the overarching question. So you need to have one broad question, out of which you set maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then you set your objectives. It becomes the basis on which to write out your problem statement, like I said, and be sure that it refers to an important, authentic, genuine problem. So you just don't say anything. What is the issue in society? What is the issue in your business? What is the issue in academic literature? And that is what you have to write the thesis about. Ask yourself, so why is this a problem? Why is this a problem? Is it because sales are not as they used to be? Is it because people are not behaving right? Is it because it's not making you have a clearer decision making, or it's not making you take a very clear decision? So you've got to identify why is that a problem, and that can actually help you to identify or to determine whether this is really a researchable area or not. Would that actually enhance somebody's performance? You have to ask all these things. So the fact that there may be little in the literature on the subject is not a problem. And people say, oh, this is not, usually you get that. Oh, the research in England or in Europe and America has not been done in Ghana. Is that a problem? No. You see, it is a problem, but this is not a problem. Because once it hasn't been done in Ghana, it means that perhaps we are not following best practices. You understand? We are not following best practices. So you can say that as a result of the absence of that particular knowledge, we are not achieving optimum results. So that's the problem. Before you come to the fact that it hasn't been done here. But the fact that it hasn't been done here doesn't override our incompetence, so to speak, because of the lack of that knowledge. Or our inefficiencies, so to speak, because of lack of that knowledge. You understand? It doesn't mean that when you say it hasn't been done here, it's not legitimate. It is. But that is not the overriding importance. The actual problem is because the absence of that particular problem, or the absence of that particular knowledge, is making us do things that are somehow not right, or that are not helping us to achieve optimum performance. So that has to be the problem first. Then at the later end, you can say that literature in Ghana hadn't actually covered it. Are you with me? So for every problem, there has to be a worthwhile reason, like we said. For example, will the findings help businesses to understand more the consumer's behavior towards a particular product during pregnancy? Now, the reason I'm using this is because, you see, consumer behavior generally could have been done, but you want to have a specific unit of analysis, pregnant women, or a specific unit of analysis, young people. And even with the young people, you can hold it on young girls, young boys. Further down, you get it. So you always have to drill down the research area or the problem so that you can actually have a successful thesis. Although every topic should have the potential to make contribution to a particular field, as we've said it over time, that shouldn't be the overriding objective. Rather, the importance has to be this. Right? The topic should be narrowly defined in this way, that it is specific enough to be carried out to its conclusion. And then again, it can sustain your interest, because if it's too huge, your interest can wane. Interest wanes when you can't really do the work, or you can't find the data on it, you can't clear your mind with what you're doing. So your interest will wane over time. So you've got to make sure that you have it narrow so that you can achieve these. So all qualitative research is made from perceived problem, like we have said. Some unsatisfactory situation, conditions, or phenomena that we want to confront. Now, let me make a distinction here. When it comes to quantitative, sometimes it's just to prove that that particular concept works. All right, so that's different from qualitative. Some quantitative studies just to prove it. All right, so they may differ. They may not necessarily have some kind of social issue, but we have come to understand that this is it, but does it really work? So quantitative study may be testing that particular, truth, so to speak. All right, sometimes about scholarly debate and pressing social issue. Remember when they said the earth was square? Have you heard that before? Yeah, and they were arguing and they have to do research upon research to find that the earth is actually round. Why was it necessary? Because if you look at those who, the nautical guys, those who go shipping and fishing and those, they need that information. All right, they need that information to make sure that, because if you go and the horizon keeps pushing and pushing, you think that that's the end, isn't it? And you go and it's not the end, and you have to go and say that you just put maybe 2 gallons of fuel. Because that's the distance. And you start going and the horizon starts pushing. By the time you get to somewhere, your fuel is gone. And you can't actually go beyond that. Because you didn't carry yourself enough fuel. Because the earth was known to be square. So there's an end point. You get the point. So it could be scholarly debate. And you pick it up and then you do it. But it has social relevance, or it has, benefits in society. So basically, the problem is the discrepancy between what we already know and what we don't, or what we want to know. How do we craft the research objective? Again, to make it interesting. These are some of the examples. And some of us actually find it difficult crafting these, And we're saying that in most cases, qualitative research is about what? Exploratory. It's open-ended. You're exploring, you are throwing more light on something. Exploring means something doesn't exist and you want to find what exists. Throwing more light is different. It means we know, but we don't know much about it. And describing means you want to have a definition of it. All right? So you've got to be careful how you phrase your objectives. If the work is to throw more light, don't ask exploratory questions. Or you may be asking exploratory questions because a particular component of what exists is not there. So you can do that. So you have to know what your work set out to achieve. Is that exploratory? Is that to enhance understanding? And all those things you've got to be aware of. So we say that to identify, for example, consumer behavior typologies. This objective means that we know consumer behavior exists. All right. And then we know that there may be types of consumer behavior, but what are the types? All right. So it's to identify the typologies of consumer behavior. The next one is to establish the relationship between cognitive dissonance and postmodern consumer behavior, which means we know there's something called cognitive dissonance, and we know there's something called postmodern consumer behavior. However, we can't tell perhaps the relationship between. So you want to establish that. All right, you want to bring that one out. To describe the characteristics of postmodern consumer. So who is a postmodern consumer? How does the person behave? If we see one, how do we tell? So again, to describe, you are bringing the characteristics, you are defining who that person is. All right? So that should follow its own questions. To determine the implications of cognitive dissonance on customer retention programs or firms. Again, you know that there's something that exists, but how do we get to know, the relationship between these two? So again, you want to determine that. And to estimate the cost implications for attracting or retaining a postmodern versus rational consumer with sales promotion. All these things are examples of how we can actually craft, objectives, research objectives. You need to have some diversity. You need to have some flair in using the language. Otherwise, you would always have the same language running through it. And as Professor said earlier on, you need to show variety. You need to show some kind of, I don't know how to put it, but some different terms to make sure that your work is rich and it's set out, to achieve what it aims to achieve. about the questions. So the following are some of the examples of research questions. Again, what are the different types of consumer buying behavior? What are the different types of consumer buying? And what do we know or don't know about consumer buying behavior? How would we describe consumer buying behavior? How many of us can say that, or how many of us think that this questions, or these two questions, are the same as the first? Do you agree? Look at the way it's set up. Or do you think they are different? I want somebody to tell me. Are they the same, the three, or they are different? And what is consumer buying behavior? When is a consumer buying behavior rational? And when is a consumer buying behavior postmodern? All these questions, how many of them? 5. Yeah. Would you say that they are the same? Yeah? Actually?
No.
No? Why?
Because each seeks to answer each seeks to achieve the research objective.
Yeah.
For example, the first research objective.
Yeah.
To identify consumer behavior typologies.
Yeah.
When you come to the research question,
yeah,
what are the different types of consumer buying behavior?
Yeah.
So I see that answering, trying to achieve that.
Yeah.
So they are different.
Yeah. Ajo, they are the same. They are the same, where they're different. If you ask somebody, how would you describe consumer buying behavior? All right. The person is most likely to give you different, or maybe 5 people are likely to give you maybe each of them what they know. So this person knows consumer buying behavior to be this. This person knows to be that. By the time you finish, you have the typology. Are you with me? When is consumer buying behavior rational? And I will describe when the person behaves. This one also describes what he thinks when the person behaves is rational. By the time you finish, you have the typology. Are you with me? So what essentially I'm saying is that we find it difficult putting research questions and describing or identifying research objectives. But there are many ways that we can do that. So don't have the same, what is this kind of attitude in writing. Make sure that you ensure variety so that the work is rich. Alright? Make sure that you ensure variety. Make use of the language. We all have difficulties in the English language. So I have a grammar kind of thing website that I normally go. 15 minutes. Okay. So make sure that you look out for some of these websites. They're very credible ones out there to show you how to use these languages in your thesis. Because your thesis could be boring if you don't actually vary the language. So to make your thesis interesting, again, depends on your research questions and objectives, how you set them out. Alright? So please be aware of some of these things. Again, we're saying that you can actually develop, research questions and objectives from the literature. I mean, basically, when there's confusion in the literature, for example, competing explanations, why should there be competing explanations? It can actually offer you grounds to start a particular research. Can we get clarity in the area? Alright, you can pick it up and then look out for, trying to bring clarity. But you see, some of these areas, if you have to do that, then you have to be very confident that you can do that work. Because you don't come and complicate it more. Alright? Neglect. You can also argue that there's a neglect in the particular area. Maybe, like I said, the pregnant woman example. I use that because typically we haven't actually seen consumer research looking at that. But we all know that pregnant women have special needs. Alright? Most of them don't like snails and things like that. Most of them don't want to hear cigarette scent and things like that. You understand? They have some particular needs. So it's a very specific area that we can actually research into. Do we have studies on that? No. So you can actually argue that consumer research or consumer behavior or buyer behavior research has neglected that particular area, and as a result you're interested in that. Alright? You can also talk about expanding, extending, complementing, or diverging from existing literature. Again, the literature has done something, but you think that you can actually contextually contribute to that, expanding the field. So you can do that. So some people did a study. Lock and Goldenberg. They did a study and said almost half of research used argument of incompleteness. Almost half of research used the argument of incompleteness, that the area hadn't been what? Researched enough. There is no completeness in that. So they have to advance that area. Some talk about inadequacy in some significant way. So maybe contextually, they haven't been that much done. Here it is claimed that prior literature has overlooked an important perspective, which would have had the potential to further our understanding of the subject matter. It could be theoretical, it could be contextual, it could be methodology. Sometimes, maybe you think that if the thing had been done in quantitative, it could have given much more clarity. So you will set out to do a quantitative study, but you see, again, it has to be tied to a social need. Would it give much more results, or would it enhance a lot more? The decision making, enhance decision making, rather than just doing it. So you've got to actually tie this one in to the actual need. A third and noticeable, more uncommon way of questioning literature is to claim that it is incommensurate, as in people have misled, people, or the literature is actually misled, us. So advocates of these field studies argue that existing literature not only neglects certain perspectives, but also misguide the way knowledge is produced about the subject area. Maybe wrong methodology was adopted, so therefore the conclusion was wrong, and that's what you want to guard yourself against. So these are some of the things that you can also pick it up. If you think that the study available now actually misguides our understanding. And I think that the debate about whether the earth was round or square actually stems from these areas as well. Right? So, researchers' ways of constructing research questions is to review existing literature, like we said, in order to find some deficiency in it, whether the literature is incomplete, incommensurate, or inadequate. And like I said, in qualitative study, the aim is to explore, to describe, and to understand. So you always have to bear this one in mind. Does your work set out to explore new findings, or to describe existing findings, or existing knowledge, or to throw more light on existing knowledge? So these three, therefore, you need to be specific about the words you use to develop your research problem, like we said. And then the three things have to be interconnected. The three things I told you about. The research problem, the research objectives, and then the research question. They have to be interconnected. Otherwise, you have a disjointed thesis. Any questions? I was going to say that we do some exercise to create a research, questions from a research objective and problem.
When you were talking about the objective search, setting objectives, you made mention of a word like estimate. When you use estimate, is it not going to be more quantitative than qualitative?
Yeah, but you see, the qualitative study doesn't mean that there's no quantification in it. That's one mistake that we always make. We think that qualitative means qualitative and there's quantification. But there are times where you have a quantification in qualitative study, not necessarily going through the regressions and all those methods that you use in quantitative. But you can still have that quantification. But clearly, when it comes to estimation, you would think that it's quantitative. But sometimes you can have certain, quantification in qualitative study. Any other? Should every research be backed by a theory? Well, from where I come from, I would say yes. But you see, again, it's philosophical. There are certain philosophical positions that would say no. You know, and I'm sure some of these arguments have actually cropped up in one way or the other, that you don't necessarily need theory. Sometimes it's about theory generation. You see, say that you're actually doing a grounded theory, you're using a grounded theory method approach. You may actually be developing the theory out of the text, all right? But the question is there no theory behind it? You know, perhaps yes, perhaps no. But again, like I said, it's philosophical. So, you know, some people with a particular philosophical position would say that no. But in most cases, you would have a theory behind it. Because again, what actually guides your what we call questioning and other, you know, the data collection can't just be an abstraction. You know.
We were talking about the website where we mentioned new words and languages.
Yeah, and I can send the link to Jennifer, and then we'll actually send you guys. There's some grammar websites, credible ones, where you can actually go there to look at how you use some of these conjunctions, interjections, and all those things to make your work richer. And they show you how to use it. So I'll send a link to Jennifer. I think I've given to quite a number of my students to have a look. But I'll send it to Jennifer, the link, and she can access it. Okay, Josh.
So, it's the identification of the research problem.
Yeah.
Probably you have been reading literature, and you realize that in a particular area, other countries have actually gone into it, and they have seen how it will work for them.
Yeah.
But where you are, it has been neglected.
Yeah.
Nobody has gone into it.
Yeah.
Is it not enough reason
It is.
to go ahead?
It is. But what I'm saying is that when you're articulating why you're doing it, don't say it is because it hasn't been done in that. Alright? But say what it is that is letting that problem persist. So for example, people have looked into, let's say, stem cells, alright, in other jurisdictions. And it has helped the medical advances to heal certain, and we still have problems with the medical. So say that the absence of that particular study is making us not solve that particular social issue. Alright? Then you back it up with the, obviously it relates to the literature. You get it? Because context-wise it's different. Ghanaian body tissue will be different from, you know, the European or the Western people. So clearly, if we have to start, you know, looking into it, it will help us to know whether we'll be able to use stem cells, let's say, to what? To solve our ailment or our problems or not. But you can actually argue from the position that because of the lack of that knowledge, we are not being able to what? To tackle a particular social issue. Alright? Then of course the theory or the literature bit comes in. But to say that because the thing hasn't been done in Ghana, the reason why you're doing it is not enough reason. Yeah, come again.
Sir,
Yeah.
sometimes you may not really see the thing as a social issue that is prevailing,
Yeah.
but you want to know
Yeah.
whether it can be a problem. For instance,
Yeah.
we have pension schemes elsewhere,
Yeah.
pension schemes in Ghana.
Yeah.
Now, in the advanced countries,
Yeah.
they are, what do you call it, medicine has actually grown, so it can come to a point that people live longer,
Yeah.
and then they see longevity as a problem to their
Okay.
pension
Yeah.
But in Ghana, you can't tell whether we live longer or not.
Yeah.
And even if we live longer, does that affect our pensions? So you just want to know.
Yeah. But my point is that what is the benefit of that particular research out there? Did it enhance or did it enhance efficiency? You know, did it enhance maybe contribution? Did it enhance? And then you compare that result with ours. Do we have a problem of efficiency? Do we have a problem of non-contribution? Do we have? So you can say that, although you may not be clearly aware, you can speculate. You know, the attendant social issues that we have, and say that perhaps your research, when conducted here, it can enhance some of these issues that we have. And then the theory or the research bit comes in. But just articulating that it hasn't been done here is not enough. You get the point I'm making? Yeah, so their findings would have come out with certain benefits, which you think perhaps could also enable us, or we can also get the same benefits. Should we go into it? And then the literature bit, the fact that it's not in our literature comes in. Obviously, knowledge acquisition is not bad. So if you're saying that we get to know because, once you do with it, it's a good thing. But we say that it shouldn't be the overriding reason. There has to be a worthwhile reason why we are doing the research. Any other?
No. Do we have a limit to the number of research objectives and questions set?
No, but it has to be what you can take, given the time period. The objective has to be something that you can manage within that, how many, 6 months? Or what? Given it, taking into consideration your data collection and everything else, are you able to take on board 3, 4, 5 objectives? And mind you, some of the objectives are so heavy. Some of them, you can even get them from literature. Some of the objectives, by the literature review, you'll be able to fulfill them. Others is kind of linked to the field work, and therefore, so you have to weigh how many number of objectives can you take on board to complete the work within a set field. Sometimes you may even have to drop one of the objectives going forward, But again, you have to look at the impact of within this function, the entire work. Some of the objectives, if you remove them, it kind of throws your work overboard. So you have to think through some of these things before then. Yeah.
Look, in employing different disciplines into your research work, won't you deviate from actually being in your field? For instance, looking at social marketing and HIV, won't you be talking much about HIV instead of looking at marketing?
That's a good question. It's like conversation, isn't it? When you start chatting with your friend and you bring in some example of Mahuata, do you stay on the Mahuata course to say you must identify when do you have to come back to reality. After talking about Mahuata, then they say, but what's that story you had? It's a conversation. So you must know at what point do you come back to the story. Alright? At what point do you come back to the story? And the issue is that you also have to identify what important points about Mahuata do you have to bring in to enhance the understanding of the story. Not anything about Mahuata, you just say.